The prison yard had a reputation. Everyone who walked through those gates knew it. Guards knew it, wardens knew it, and the inmates, especially the ones who'd been there a while, they knew it better than anyone. There was a hierarchy in that place, and at the top of that hierarchy sat a group of men who had turned cruelty into a full-time job. They were the ones who decided who ate in peace and who didn't, who slept through the night and who didn't, who survived their first week and who spent it bleeding. These men had been running that yard for years, and in all that time, nobody had ever successfully stood up to them. Nobody. Until the day a new inmate arrived and changed everything forever. Before I tell you what happened, I want you to understand something about prison culture, because it matters for this story. When a new person arrives in a maximum security facility, the first few hours are the most important hours of their entire stay. The way you carry yourself in those first hours sets the tone for everything that follows. Come in with your head down, looking scared, looking soft, and the wolves will smell it immediately. They will test you, push you, take from you, and if you let them get away with it once, they will never stop. It's a brutal system. It's an unfair system, but it's the system that exists inside those walls, and everyone who enters has to navigate it whether they want to or not. On this particular day, the facility received a new transfer. Nothing unusual about that. New transfers happened regularly. The guards processed the paperwork, handed over the standard issue clothing, ran through the basic orientation, and then walked the new arrival onto the main block. And that's when people started noticing. Because this new inmate wasn't a young guy. He wasn't some nervous first-timer with wide eyes and shaking hands. He was older, heavy-set, and he moved through the block with a kind of stillness that was hard to describe. Not the stillness of someone trying not to be noticed, the opposite. The stillness of someone who simply was not concerned about his surroundings because nothing in his surroundings scared him. That kind of stillness is extremely rare. Most people, even tough people, even people who have been in difficult situations before, they carry a certain tension in a place like this, a tightness in the shoulders, a quickness in the eyes, a readiness that betrays the fact that they know danger is nearby and they are preparing for it. This man had none of that. He walked like he was strolling through a park on a Sunday afternoon. The group noticed him immediately. They always noticed the new arrivals. That was their job in a twisted sense. They were the welcoming committee, except their version of a welcome was designed to establish dominance as quickly and as painfully as possible. The leader of the group, a man who had been in that facility for 6 years and who had never once been seriously challenged, looked this new transfer up and down and decided he saw easy prey. Older guy, soft-looking, nobody backing him up. Perfect. He told his crew to wait and let the new guy get comfortable for a day or two. Let him think he was going to have a normal experience, and then they would introduce themselves. What the group did not know, what nobody in that facility knew at that point, was who this man actually was. The name on the transfer paperwork was there for anyone to see, but in a maximum security prison, people don't always pay close attention to names. They pay attention to size, to posture, to energy, to the signals the body sends out about how dangerous a person is. And while this man's energy sent out every signal imaginable that he was not someone to be messed with, the group either missed those signals or chose to ignore them, which turned out to be one of the most significant mistakes any of them would ever make. His name was Seagal, and if you know that name, you already understand why what happened next was not just predictable, it was inevitable. Seagal had been training in martial arts since he was a teenager. He moved to Japan in his early 20s and spent years immersed in Aikido, one of the most sophisticated and technically demanding martial arts in the world. He didn't just learn Aikido as a hobby or a fitness routine, he mastered it. He became the first foreigner in history to operate his own Aikido dojo in Japan, which, if you know anything about Japanese martial arts culture, is an almost unbelievable achievement. The Japanese are extraordinarily protective of their traditions. For a foreigner to not only earn their respect,
But to be entrusted with teaching their art, that requires a level of genuine mastery that cannot be faked or exaggerated. It has to be real. And in Seagal's case, it was absolutely real. Beyond the Aikido, Seagal had spent decades accumulating knowledge and experience across multiple disciplines. He had trained with some of the most dangerous people on the planet. He had spent time with law enforcement, with military personnel, with fighters and instructors who operated in environments where the techniques they taught were not for competition, not for sport, but for situations where your life depended on what your body could do in the next 3 seconds. That kind of training changes a person. It doesn't just develop physical ability, it develops a particular kind of mental calm, a certain relationship with danger, where danger stops being something that panics you and becomes something you simply solve, like a math problem, like a puzzle. Here's the threat, here is my body, here is what needs to happen. That was the man who had just walked onto the block, and the group had no idea. The first 2 days passed without incident. Seagal settled in, learned the rhythms of the place, observed quietly, spoke to almost no one. The group watched him from a distance. Let him get comfortable. Let him think maybe this place wasn't so bad. That was always the strategy. Lull the new arrival into a false sense of security and then strike when they were least expecting it. On the 3rd day, they made their move.
It happened in the common area, after the evening meal. The block was its usual combination of noise and tension. Inmates at tables, guards doing their rounds, the background hum of a controlled but fundamentally unpredictable environment. Seagal was sitting alone, not isolated in a scared way, just alone in the way someone sits when they don't particularly need company. And the group approached. The leader walked up first, with 2 of his crew flanking him on either side. Standard intimidation formation, designed to make the target feel surrounded, outnumbered, and trapped before a single word was even spoken. He stood over Seagal's table and said something along the lines of, "You're in our spot." It doesn't matter much exactly what the words were never really the point. The point was the power move. The point was making the new guy stand up, back down, move away, and in doing so, publicly demonstrate to everyone in that common area that this was the order of things, and the new guy understood his place within it. Seagal looked up at him. And here is the moment that multiple people who witnessed what followed describe as the moment they knew something very different was about to happen. Because Seagal's expression did not change, not even slightly. There was no flash of fear, no rapid blinking, no involuntary swallow, no tension creeping into the jaw or the shoulders. He just looked at the man standing over him with an expression that was completely and utterly neutral, not aggressive, not submissive, just still. The kind of still that only comes from a person who has genuinely faced dangerous situations so many times that a prison yard bully standing over them barely registers on the internal threat scale. He said something quiet. Witnesses remember it differently, but the general consensus is that he told the man to walk away. Simply and directly. Walk away. The leader laughed. His crew laughed. The room, or at least the part of it paying attention, shifted its energy. Because that kind of response from a new inmate was unheard of. You didn't tell this man to walk away. Nobody told this man to walk away. This man didn't walk away from anything. That was the whole point of being this man. He leaned in closer, getting into Seagal's personal space, the classic escalation move, daring him to either back down completely or do something stupid that would justify what was coming. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. People who saw it have spent years trying to describe it accurately, and most of them conclude that describing it accurately is nearly impossible, because the human eye wasn't quite fast enough to fully track everything that occurred within those 4 seconds. The leader reached out to grab Seagal by the collar. It was the physical punctuation mark on the confrontation, the moment where words ended and force began. The grab that was supposed to haul Seagal to his feet and make absolutely clear who was in charge here. His hand never made contact. Seagal moved in a way that seemed to operate outside the normal rules of how bodies move. He didn't jump back, he didn't flinch, he flowed. That is the word multiple witnesses use independently of each other. He flowed. It was as if his body had already known the grab was coming before it happened, and had simply begun moving to address it at some point before the conscious mind of anyone watching had even registered there was something to address. The reaching hand was redirected, not blocked in the stiff, forceful way you might see in a street fight, but guided, smoothly and precisely in a direction it had not intended to go. And before the leader could process what was happening to his own arm, his balance was gone. In Aikido, taking a person's balance is not a matter of overpowering them. It is a matter of redirecting the energy they are already generating and guiding it into a direction that serves you. When someone reaches for you with aggression, they are already committing energy forward. Seagal simply accepted that energy and steered it. The result was that a man who outweighed him significantly found himself moving in a direction he had not chosen at a speed he could not control, and then found himself on the ground in a way that he also had not chosen and could not easily explain. The whole thing happened so smoothly that for a split second, the room wasn't entirely sure what it had just witnessed. The first crew member reacted immediately. He moved toward Seagal from the left side, which was exactly where Seagal was already looking. There was a brief engagement, again described by witnesses as almost impossibly fluid, and the crew member joined his leader on the ground. The second crew member hesitated for just a moment, which was enough. When he came forward, the outcome was the same. 3 men on the ground in less than 5 seconds. 3 men who had terrorized that block for years, who had never been seriously challenged, who had walked up to this table fully expecting a routine display of dominance, and they were all on the floor looking up at the ceiling trying to figure out what had just happened to them. Seagal stood in the space between them. He was not breathing hard, he was not in a fighting stance, he was just standing there. The same stillness he had carried when he first walked onto that block. The same complete absence of stress or urgency. He looked at the 3 men on the ground, and then he looked around the room at everyone else who had stopped what they were doing to watch, and then he sat back down. Just sat back down like he had briefly gotten up to handle a minor inconvenience and was now returning to whatever he had been doing before. The silence in that common area lasted a long time. Longer than silences usually last in places like that. It was during that silence that someone said the name out loud, a guy near the back of the room who had recognized Seagal from the moment he walked in, but had been waiting to see if anyone else would say it first. The name traveled around the room in a wave. You could almost watch it moving from person to person, eyes going wide, heads turning, people leaning over to confirm with the person next to them what they thought they had just heard. Because if the name was right, if it was really him, then everything that had just happened made complete and total sense. Steven Seagal, the man from the movies, above the law, hard to kill, under siege. The man who had spent decades portraying on screen the kind of unstoppable, technically precise fighter who handles multiple attackers effortlessly. Except here was the thing, and this is the thing that casual moviegoers sometimes miss. Seagal's screen fighting was not invented for the camera. It was not choreography built on wire work and editing tricks. Seagal moved the way he moved in those movies because that was actually how he moved. The techniques he used on screen were real Aikido techniques, executed by a man who had genuinely spent decades mastering them. The movies were big screen versions of what had just happened in real life in that common room. The 3 men got up from the floor slowly and quietly and went elsewhere. Nobody followed them. Nobody made jokes at their expense loudly, because this was still a prison and social intelligence was a survival skill. But everyone had seen what happened. Everyone processed it according to their own understanding of what they had witnessed. And for the group that had run that block unchallenged for years, something had fundamentally shifted. Not just because they had lost a physical confrontation, although that was devastating enough on its own, but because of how they had lost it, because of the complete absence of effort on the other side, because of the 4 seconds and the stillness and the sitting back down like it was nothing. When you bully people for years, you build your reputation on the gap between your strength and other people's fear. The bigger that gap, the more powerful you feel. What Seagal had done in those 4 seconds was not just close the gap. He had revealed that from his perspective, there was no gap at all. There never had been. He had walked onto that block already existing in a place so far beyond these men in terms of capability that the entire confrontation had been, from his point of view, the most minor of minor situations. And that realization, that understanding of just how small they actually were in the face of someone genuinely capable, that was the thing that truly humiliated them. Not the fall, the smallness. Word moved through the facility the way word moves through any closed community, fast and with embellishment. By the next morning, every person in that prison knew 2 things. They knew what had happened in the common room, and they knew who had made it happen. Guards who had watched years of the group's behavior with a complicated mixture of awareness and limited ability to fully stop it found themselves quietly recalibrating, because the dynamic on that block had shifted overnight in a way that the normal mechanisms of prison management had never managed to achieve. Not because Seagal had set out to change anything. He hadn't. He had simply responded to a situation the way his training had equipped him to respond over decades of genuine work and genuine mastery. There's something worth pausing on here because this story is not just about a fight. It's about what happens when real ability meets performed ability. The group in that prison had built their power entirely on the performance of violence, the threat of it, the reputation for it, the stories about it. Actual violence was almost secondary to the performance of it, because most of the control they exerted was through fear, and fear runs on perception. As long as everyone believed they were the most dangerous people in that environment, they were. Belief did most of the work. But the thing about perception-based power is that it is catastrophically fragile when it meets actual ability, because actual ability does not operate on perception. It does not need you to believe in it. It simply exists, and it performs when called upon regardless of what anyone believes. Seagal's ability existed before anyone in that prison knew his name. It would have existed if no one ever knew his name. And it performed in those 4 seconds not because of his reputation, but in spite of the fact that his reputation was temporarily unknown to the people testing him. That is the difference between real and performed. Real doesn't need an audience to function. Performed falls apart without one. Seagal never spoke publicly about the specifics of this incident. That tracks with who he is. Whatever else has been said about Steven Seagal over the years, whatever debates exist about his personality or his claims or his public behavior, the martial arts foundation is genuine. The Aikido is real. The decades of training are real. The ability is real. And real ability tends to be quiet about itself in a way that performed ability never can be, because performed ability depends entirely on being loud. The inmates who witnessed what happened in that common room have talked about it over the years. Stories like this don't stay contained. They travel. They get passed from person to person, from that facility to others, from former inmates to people on the outside. And the story always has the same shape no matter who is telling it. The group walked up. Seagal told them to walk away. They didn't. 4 seconds, 3 men on the floor.
Seagal sitting back down. That shape doesn't change because the shape is true. And the reason people keep telling it, the reason it keeps moving, is because it hits something deep in the way people think about power and reputation and what it actually means to be dangerous. We live in a world full of people telling us how powerful they are, full of loud voices and big claims and carefully managed images. And most of the time we can't really test those claims. We just have to take people's word for it or not. But every once in a while, in a closed room with witnesses, the claim meets the reality. And what happens in that meeting tells you everything you need to know. The person whose power was real doesn't need to say anything afterward. The situation said it for them. The person whose power was performed finds out something about themselves that no amount of future talking will ever completely undo. The group never approached Steven Seagal again, not once for the remainder of his time in that facility, and the block that they had terrorized for years was noticeably different afterward. Not because Seagal policed it or positioned himself as a new authority. He didn't. He went about his time the way he had from the moment he arrived, quiet, still, unbothered. But the presence of someone whose ability was verifiably real changed the invisible architecture of that space. It changed what felt possible and what felt sustainable. And the thing that had felt most sustainable for years, the rule of the loudest and the most threatening, suddenly felt a lot less stable than it used to. Because everyone on that block had now seen something they could not unsee. They had seen what it looked like when the performed met the real. They had seen the 4 seconds. They had seen the stillness before and the stillness after. And they had watched 3 men who had never been beaten walk away from a table, trying very hard to look like they hadn't just been changed by what happened to them. But they had been changed. Everyone in that room had been changed. Because some things, once you witness them, live in you forever. Some things you can't talk yourself out of, or rationalize away, or reframe into something more comfortable. Some things just are what they are. And what happened in that common room was exactly what it looked like. A man who had spent his life building real skill, doing the actual work, putting in the actual hours across decades of genuine commitment to mastery, meeting a moment that called for everything he had built, and answering it so completely and quietly that the answer echoed through that entire facility for the rest of the time he was there. Real doesn't announce itself. Real doesn't need to. It just waits. And when the moment comes, it simply shows up and does what real has always been able to do. And no amount of noise, no amount of reputation, no amount of years spent making everyone afraid of you, none of it means anything when real finally shows up and says, quietly, unequivocally, and without a single wasted movement, "Show me."